am Sophia. I'm going to talk to you about my project that I've been working on while I've been here at the bio station, some of the pieces that I've started working on. I want to encourage you guys to ask questions during my presentation because I'm a big question asker, and so if I get all the way to the end of a presentation and someone else is giving it, I forget my question by the end. So if any of you do that, you are more than welcome to interrupt and ask questions during my presentation. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. And then also pretty much everything that I'm going to be talking about in my presentation, I do have all of my materials set up on this table over here. So if during lunch, if you have clean hands, you can look through my my plein air sketchbook, and you can look at the materials that I use and all the paints that I use for my plein air, and you can see some of the larger projects that I'm developing. So you're welcome to look at that later, and throughout the day that'll be set up all day, but mostly everything will be in the presentation, and then that is just supplemental. Okay, so first I just want to tell you a little bit about myself. I do have a website if you want to visit it and check it out. It's just sophiahart.com. I also have an Instagram. That's where I've been sharing all of my plein air paintings. And I just kind of share the picture of them, out where I've painted them, and a little bit about the bio station, about the day and stuff. So we've still got a week left here, so if you want to see more of my posts on my Instagram, you can head over there. It's just Heart Illustration 7. Just to give you a little bit of a background on myself, I was born in Michigan, but I currently live in Bellingham, Washington. I've lived in Washington State for about 2 years now. I went to community college first in Michigan. I have a background in fine arts and ceramics, so I find that my 3D art often informs my 2D art, just the experience I had building and making with ceramics. And then after community college, I went to Kendall College of Art and Design in West Michigan, and I got my Bachelor's of Art in Illustration. And then I did my first residency at a place called Pierce Cedar Creek Nature Institute, and that is also in West Michigan. And that's kind of between finishing up my bachelor's degree and that residency, that's kind of when I fell in love with science and art together. I'd kind of always been interested in science, but I was pursuing this art path, and then I started working on my graduating portfolio exhibition, and I was like, I really like bugs and plants and animals, and I want to do more with this. And then I got my first residency, and there was all kinds of stuff there that was super inspiring. So then I went back to school after that, and I just took some classes in botany and zoology, just to kind of inform my art a little bit more. I would like to go back to school eventually, maybe. We'll never know when, because COVID kind of messed all that up. But I'm kind of thinking of doing something sort of like a hybrid master's degree or something where I could combine art and science together and maybe sort of do something like that. So that's just a little bit of a background on my education. Next, I'm going to tell you about Inktober. So just to give you like a little bit of a background so you know what Inktober is. Not a lot of people know what it is. It's like it's like an art exercise that this guy named Jake Parker started, and he wanted to just improve on his drawing skills, and he wanted to create this healthy practice of drawing every day and creating every day. And so he started this in 2009, and the rules of it basically was you make a drawing in ink every day, you post it online, you hashtag it with Inktober, and then you're going to do it every day of October. And so this started in 2009 and just kind of took off, and people have been doing it every year for years. People make all their own different prompt lists. So this one on the right is actually the first one that I followed. I started doing it in 2019, and this prompt list was put together by the Guild of Natural Science Illustrators and someone who was a part of that, and I joined the guild after I graduated college. So that's the first prompt list that I followed. And then the next 2 years that I did a prompt list by Zoe Keller, and she did this Wild October art. And for the first year that I did it, I was like, okay, well, I'm a painter. How can I get away with still doing this, but still getting to paint? So I did the first year in watercolor and ink, and I was like, okay, so I'm still doing Inktober because it's ink. And then the second year, I just completely gave up on ink because it's not really one of my favorite mediums. And so the second year, I did gouache. And then the third year, another artist, she actually lives and works in Australia. Her name is Sean Donthes, and she created Peachtober, which is just like a bunch of fun little creative prompts. And I did that one last year because I really wanted to branch out of what I had been so used to doing, which was a lot of scientific work and a lot of scientific illustrations. So this was from my first year in 2019. These are a few of the watercolor pieces, and then I sort of played around with the ink with them, so I was still using ink. And those were from 2019. This was the second year when I did Wild October art and completely abandoned the ink altogether. This is gouache, which is a paint that is sort of a combination between like acrylic and watercolor. You can get it to work opaquely, and you can get it to work translucent, kind of like watercolor. So this was from the second year I did it, which was 2020. And then this was from 2021. This is last year's. This is when I used the Peachtober prompts. So that one on the left, the prompt for that day was fall. So like the first thing I thought of was, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? And then I was like, what about a rooster on a little chicken coop laying an egg? But roosters don't lay eggs. So the one in the middle, the prompt for that one was match. And like the first thing that I thought of was, what can you never seem to find the match of? Your socks. And then the one at the end was cloud. And I just kind of had this like mystical idea in my head of this lighthouse and a cloud with a little ship. So I wanted to do that prompt list last year because I wanted to just branch out a little bit and work on some things that like I hadn't worked on before and sort of like flex my creative muscles a bit, because I found that I was sort of falling into this pattern where I was just concentrating on like scientific illustrations, and which is great, I love doing that, but I wasn't flexing my creative muscles a lot, so I wanted to start doing that more with that prompt list. Yes.
Have you developed your own prompt list? What will be on it?
I have not yet. So I'll kind of get into that a little bit when I start talking about my plein air work that I've been doing at Flathead Lake. So I guess that's the closest that I've really gotten to making my own prompt list. I've thought about it. I might one day. This is probably something I'm going to continue to do throughout the next few years until it no longer becomes fun for me. And so, yeah. So this slide is what is plein air. So I'm just going to tell you guys a little bit about what plein air painting is, and these are a few that I've done in the past. So plein air is actually a French term. It stands for in the open air, and this practice goes back centuries. It was started by French impressionists, and it really came from this desire to want to experience the landscape and also paint it at the same time. So some famous plein air artists that you might know, John Singer Sargent, that's one of his paintings on the left, and Winslow Homer on the right. They're two artists that I really love. And then I want to talk a little bit about an artist that just inspires me and my plein air paintings. His name is James Gurney. You might know him, but he's famous a lot for his Dinotopia books. So he wrote and illustrated Dinotopia, and there are several different Dinotopia books. And he is just a really cool artist. He's this really prolific plein air painter. He has a blog. He posts all over the internet. He's got this incredible setup that he works with when he does plein air painting, and I actually discovered him sometime, well, he's kind of always been a part of my childhood. My parents both loved Dinotopia, but I discovered that he did this plein air painting a few years ago in 2018. So these are just a few of his plein air paintings that I I really like. And he actually works in gouache as well. So I work in gouache with my plein air paintings.
Which
and
gouache?
It's a paint that's like a, did you ask which gouache I used or what gouache?
Which combination? I got you. I got you.
Yeah, it's sort of like a cross between acrylic and watercolor. I like to use Holbein, which is the brand that I use, and he actually uses gouache too, so it's really nice to work with. This is actually my very first plein air painting, and I ended up painting with acrylic paint on sketchbook paper, which you can imagine didn't quite work out so well, but that was what I had at the time, and so I decided to work with that because I just really wanted to get out and paint. These next two are, the one on the left is from my first residency at Pure Cedar Creek Institute. That's when I started working with gouache. And that whole summer that I was there for 3 months, and I worked with gouache the whole time that I was there.
Are you still using gouache as like one of your main mediums, or have you evolved?
Yeah, so I use it especially for plein air painting because I really like it. It's one of my favorite mediums to use for that. When I get the slide loaded again, I can show you the watercolor plein air painting that I did. Because I did try watercolor for a bit. So yeah, gouache on the left, and then on the right is watercolor. When I moved to Washington, I went out and I started doing some plein air painting. And I was like, oh, well, I'll try watercolor again and see if I like it. And I do like it, it's still nice, but I just prefer to use gouache because in those moments where I really want to get some of the layers and I want to get that opaque color of that paint, it's nice that I can still kind of create that translucent layer, and then I can also add the more opaque colors on the top of it. And so now I'm going to talk to you about the plein air Inktober paintings that I've been doing while I've been here at the biostation. So I've done 17 so far. I haven't done it every day because everybody needs a break every once in a while, which is totally fine, so give yourself a break. And so I have 17 that I'm going to kind of share with you, and just things about the day, if there was something interesting that happened that day, and then if you'd like to see them in person in my sketchbook, you can look at that later. So this was day one, this was the first one, and I was originally in cabin F4 when I got here, but there was some ants in there that were bothering me a little bit too much, and so I moved cabins. But I also have a map next to it so you can see where it is. So this is number 1 right there at cabin F4, and that's just sort of like a view of Yellow Bay. And if you notice, one of the things that I love to do when I do these plein air paintings is I like to time myself. And I just like to see what I can accomplish, because I also like to make this sort of like an exercise where I'm not spending super long on it, maybe like an hour to an hour and a half, and then that sort of like equates to like 2 hours because I'm going out and I'm hiking to different places on the biostation. And that's a really big part of why I chose to do this while I was here. I realized like maybe a couple months before this residency that, oh my goodness, I'm gonna be at Flathead Lake during October. That's the perfect way for me to combine something that I love, like Inktober, that's super fun, with something else that I love doing, which is plein air painting, and then that's a way that I can get out and explore absolutely everything I possibly can on the biostation, because it's 31 different paintings, that's 31 different locations. I've only done 17 so far, and like 3 of them I've done off-site, but you can see all the green dots that I've already done on the grounds, and so there's a lot here that is awesome and cool and interesting and that I want to share. And so being able to get to do this every day and creating 31 of these, I'll have 31 at the end, and it's just a really special way to get out and experience the landscape at the same time.
Do you worry about bears?
A little bit, but I've got bear spray, so I'm good. I don't know how to use it, so. This is day number 2. This one is at Yellow Bay Point. There's a little dot right there. And I just walked, it was the second day I was here, I was like, I really want to see what's out there. And so I walked all the way down to the point, and then I got there and I was like, all these rocks are yellow. I was like, is this why it's Yellow Bay? And then I saw this tree and I was like, that is the coolest thing I have seen today. And I was like, I want to paint that. And so I did, and I sat on a hill for 51 minutes and painted on this hill looking up at this tree. So it was challenging, but I did it for the art. And then these are just some of the supplemental pictures from that day. So I was out there until I think I finished like around 7:15. I said it on the last slide, but I caught the sunset while I was out there, sort of through this root of this dead tree that I had just finished painting. And then day number 3, this one is just a western view of Flathead Lake. And let's see, where's dot number 3? Right there. So that was, I just sort of decided I was going to do the nature walk that day. And one thing I love as an artist is atmospheric perspective. So that's like when you look at a landscape or you look at something and the things in the back recede more because they're bluer in their color and their tone. And so I thought that this was just a great example of that, and I wanted to paint it. And so I spent about 41 minutes on this one in total. And then another thing we did that day was we took sort of like a tour of the biostation with Tom. And this painting here on the right is actually in the museum. We got to see a bunch of these sketchbooks from previous like natural science illustration students. And this is actually from 1969, and this is a student who did a plein air painting here in 1969. So I thought that was just a really interesting thing, because here I am in 2022 doing the same thing. And then for day 4, I decided to do Yellow Bay, so that's this dot right here. That one I spent about an hour and 13 minutes on total, and at that point on day 4, that was the longest one that I had done. This was day 5. I decided this day I wanted to do something I hadn't done yet, which was walk this shore. So by this time I had already moved cabins and I was out of the ant cabin. And so now I'm in cabin F9 right there. And so I walked all the way down to the shore from cabin F9, and then I walked the whole shore all the way over to the very edge of the property of the biostation, and then this tree that you can see in the left photo was sort of off the biostation property, but I was still on the biostation property, so then I just sat there and painted that tree. And in this photo on the right, you can see this little device here. I call it a little window. I'm pretty sure the actual term for it is like a sight guide, and that's just so, like, one of the things I struggle with as an artist is composition, and so by using that I can sort of move it to be the size of whatever paper I'm working on, and then that helps me figure out where everything is inside of that box. And so that's one of the tools that I use in my painting. Day 6, I decided to paint some snowberries, just because they are everywhere, and I think they're super interesting, so you can see this one. There's day 6. And then, another fun thing about day 6 is that people from the Owl Research Institute were here that night, and they were here to collect information and data about northern saw-whet owls. So they showed up about like 6:30, 6:45, and myself and a couple other of the artists sort of ambushed them, and we were like, hey, are you guys the owl people? Like, can we join? And they let us join. They were super nice to us. They answered all of our questions. And so what they do is they check the nets every 30 minutes, and the second time that night that they checked the nets, they got an owl. And so we got to see how they process all the information. Like, this is them getting ready to band it, and then here they're measuring it. So that was a really cool part about getting to see that, and that will come into play later. Day 7, this day was also another fun day. This was a really quick plein air painting because we actually got to go out and do aquatic invasive species sampling with Phil, which was probably one of my favorite things I've done here so far because we got to be so involved in the process. So by the end of the day, like you can see I finished this one at 7:10 p.m., right before the sunset. So at the end of the day, it was like I had this half hour where I had to paint really, really quickly. And so next I'll share some photos from the aquatic invasive species sampling. So what they do is they sample from the surface and then from the bottom of the lake. And so we each got to take a turn sampling from the surface, and we got to like do all the stuff with the sample where you put it into the vials and everything. And it was super fun. It was really great to be involved in that, and you'll see later how that influences more, like another piece that I'm going to do. And then here's a couple more photos. This is Sage. She's actually from like the AmeriCorps for Flathead Lake, I think. So she was helping us today too, but what they're doing there is just like rinsing out the net because they have to rinse it every time before they dunk it. And this is the big net that would collect like the bottom sample. And then the next day, myself and a couple of the other artists decided that we were going to go to Glacier. Because if I'm only in Montana for a month and I've never been to Glacier, I'm going to go to Glacier. So myself and a few of the others, we decided to go to Glacier, and I was like, hey, are you guys okay if I stop and paint for a little bit? And that's the best part about going hiking with artists, is that taking a half-hour break in the middle of a hike to sit and do a painting. So this one was really quick. It was just 32 minutes total, 29 minutes of painting, and we stopped at Twin Falls. And that's where I painted on the left. But we also got to see a moose. Her name is Lucille Ball, that's what we named her. So we got to see that moose. That was really cool and really special. I have never seen a moose before. I was completely blown away. And then just some fun pictures. This is actually a picture that Kelsie snapped of me while I was painting. So really, I just kind of plop down anywhere, no matter how uncomfortable it is. And then next was day 9. So this one was really special to me because one of the first things I noticed at the biostation was this old telephone booth. And I just think that's really magical because I think that's like a testament to how long the biostation has been here. And I love that it's still here. So on day 9, this was the longest painting that I had done. I spent an hour and 21 minutes on it, and I painted for 54 minutes total. And the reason why I spent an hour and 21 minutes painting, or an hour and 21 minutes on it and only 54 minutes painting, is because it took me like 25 minutes to get my drawing down, because architecture is not a strong suit of mine. So I was like making sure all the lines were even and where they needed to be. And then for day 10, I decided to paint the entrance road because I really liked all the fall colors that were there. And I hadn't done anything like over in this area yet, so I really wanted to do the entrance road. And then day 11, I decided to focus on something more smaller. So I was walking on the nature walk and I saw these mushrooms. And I love mushrooms, so I was like, that's it today, I gotta paint these mushrooms. And then for day 12, this was another really fun day. We got to go with Tom and Phil to the Nyack River floodplain, which is sort of like up kind of at the south part of Glacier. And so we learned a lot about how this floodplain works and about how there's groundwater that travels underground from the river, and then that's just important as the water that travels on the top of the river. And so at the end of the day, there's a family out here that owns this property, and so at the end of the day, Tom went to go visit with the family, and we all just kind of were on this random person's property, just kind of hanging out, and I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna paint while I'm here. And so that was kind of like another quick one because it had like time constraints. And this is another photo courtesy of Kelsie. She snapped of me sitting over by myself under a tree painting. And then this is just some of the photos from the floodplain. So they have like a whole sensor system and like well system that they started installing in 2011 and finished in 2012, and that was through a grant from the National Science Foundation. And so now they've spent the last 10 years like monitoring all this, and these sensors have to be calibrated each month. So even in the winter when there's like 5 feet of snow, like you gotta ski in. And even when we got like this sensor, to get to this sensor, we had to just drive across a stream. So it was a really fun day to get to kind of see like what they have to do once a month to keep up with these sensors. And so this is sort of like a zoomed out on day 13, I actually got to teach my very first workshop, and I taught a workshop all about field study and plein air painting, and a lot of the people that I taught were already really accomplished and talented artists, so when it came time to paint, I didn't really have to help them. So I was like, what better way to like memorialize this moment than to sit across from them at the dock and paint them as they worked. So you can kind of see like, there were all three right there. And then there's a few more photos from that day. So this photo on the right is actually sort of like a photo of what I was painting. And so we just kind of got to spend the day all like hanging out, talking to each other, and it was really fun. The workshop went really well, which was a relief for me because it was my very first one, so I was like super nervous. But it worked out great. And then the next one actually is another one that was off-site. This is in Jewel Basin. Myself and 3 of the other artists, we decided to go on a big hike together. And again, great hiking with artists because they'll let you pause for a half hour to paint. And this was like at the top of like a 7,000 foot ridge. So we all were like out of breath by the time that we got there. So we were like, we're gonna camp for lunch, we're gonna stop here, and we're gonna paint. And so this photo on the left was sort of from the beginning of the hike, so you can see Flathead Lake right here. And the trail we actually did was Camp Misery, which, I mean, I was having a great time, but I was also kind of miserable. And then this photo on the left, I just wanted to share because the sun was like beating down on my neck, and I was like, I can't do this, I don't want to get sunburnt, so I just sort of like took my shirt, like my long sleeve that I had, and I just sort of like tied it up over my head because I was like, I'm not going to get sunburned over this because I'm really pale and fair-skinned and I get sunburned really easily. The next one, day 15, this one is from the nature walk over here. And again, I just kind of decided like I hadn't really done anything in that area, so I really wanted to do something in that area. And then this one actually, day 16, this is the longest one I've done to date. I spent 1 hour and 26 minutes on it, but I spent 1 hour and 11 minutes painting, and I really wanted to paint the Biostation Museum, which you will see today. And because I think that's a really important part of the Biostation's history. And so I spent a long time on it. And then finally, this last one I did yesterday, and that is, I just found this tree that was like half dead, half alive, and like the roots were off the beach, and so I really wanted to paint that. And then I'll just talk to you really quick about 2 of the bigger pieces that I'm working on, sort of what I like about what I've learned so far. And you'll kind of get to see them over here. But the first one, my title for it is Devoured, a commentary on food web disruptions in Flathead Lake. And since all of you are so interested in the Daphnia, this is the Daphnia under the projection microscope. And I got to spend some time with Stephanie and Monica learning about the Daphnia, and I love them and am super fascinated by them. And so I was learning about these Daphnia and this mysis shrimp and these invasive fish, and then I actually read Tom's essay, which you all probably got a handout of it, and there are handouts of it if you want to read it. And I was reading his essay on it, and there was this sentence in it that said, netting in Yellow Bay during kokanee salmon stocking events yielded lake trout with distended bellies and kokanee tails sticking out of their mouths. And so I read that sentence and I just really connected with it, and I had this picture in my head that I wanted to draw. And so that's where this lake trout came from. And then I've got the zooplankton in here, and then the mysis shrimp as well. So it's sort of like all about the food web in Flathead Lake. And I've got, what I do is I draw it first in Photoshop because I work with watercolor. So I'll project my drawing onto the watercolor paper so I don't get it like muddy with pencil and stuff. And so I've got that pencil drawing up here for you guys to look at later. And then another one that I started is called Grasped, and it's about the northern saw-whet owl. And this just came from getting to hang out with all of the researchers when they were doing their work with the owl.
Does the owl just lie there while they measure it?
Yeah, it was pretty chill. I mean, the owl just kind of, okay, so it didn't like it when they weighed it because they were, I guess, working out methods on how to weigh it. So they were using a Pringles can And they just sort of like put the owl in it upside down so that it wouldn't fly away. And so after that, the owl was not happy. But other than that, it was just kind of like chilling. So this is the drawing that I did
So
for
it
that
just laid
piece.
there when they were measuring it and.
Yeah, they just kind of like held its feet and it just hung out.
You
And
just told them like, don't move.
yeah, its eyes were like real wide. It's really funny. And that is all I have for you guys today. Thank you for your patience.
Question,
Yes.
how many acres were you covering at all your sites, so on the station property?
Oh, I have no idea, actually. That's a really great question. I know I walked a whole lot because my
And how
phone
many
keeps telling me
artists
that.
are on site at one time?
So right now we have 4 artists. So I'm one of 4 artists that are here, and this is like the first time in the fall that Open Air has had 4 artists at Flathead Lake, which has been really great because I don't have to be lonely, whereas in the past there's been like 1 artist and there's not a lot going on here in the fall. So it's been nice to have company, especially for hike days when you want to go out and explore and you don't necessarily want to do it on your own.
The station is 80 acres, and from your map, it pretty much seems like you've covered all of the perimeters of 80 acres in content for you.
Yeah, I still got some work to do in this area and here. I don't know why, but I really like the way that the sewage like treatment plant is laid out, and I really like the construction of that building, so I want to paint that. And then there's a little area over here called the Boneyard, which is like got a bunch of like old maintenance stuff in it, and I sort of just like stumbled upon it one day, and I was like, what is this? Am I on someone else's property? Maybe I should leave. And then I found out later that that's just a bunch of old maintenance equipment, so I want to go out there and paint it in the next week because I think it's real cool.
How do you deal with, when you're doing plein air, I mean, working with ghosts and you want to change your color or have water, I mean, how do you bring the water into the, how do you set up your system so that you can keep your brushes clean and not?
Yeah, so I have a whole system that I actually use. I have a little like pickle jar, like a teeny tiny little pickle jar from this like mom and pop pickle place in Detroit, and it has a lid on it, and so I'll take that out with me, I'll fill that with water from my water bottle, and then I'm sort of kind of working on like a really good plein air setup, and so right now I'm using a camp chair because I'm working on building myself my own easel that's like specific to my needs. And so I'll have that like little jar of water in the holder of the camp chair, and then I have all my brushes in like a little roll up, and I have a little tiny palette that I use, and
Your very first one on the beach, I was just thinking sand gets everywhere.
it does. I've painted on a beach before with sand, with watercolor, and that was not a great idea. I spent weeks getting sand out of my watercolor palette, so I will not be doing that again. Well, I think we have to move on because I'm a few minutes over time. But if you guys have any more questions, I'll be around all day today. I'd be happy to show you some of my stuff.
Thank you.